Racing through the future and fighting through the past, Retronauts presents Game Boy Works Advance Episode 3. After a quick third-party detour to explore Castlevania, we return to Game Boy Advance's first-party launch fair. Well, anyway, these are at least the games published by Nintendo, if not actually developed internally. F-Zero Maximum Velocity is the third entry in the F-Zero series, or fourth depending on whether or not you count the Japan-only 64DD release as a separate title. It comes to us courtesy of a developer called Indie Cube, a joint venture between Nintendo and marketing Goliath Dentsu. Following in the wake of the blindingly fast F-Zero X for N64, Maximum Velocity's reversion to a format more in line with a Super NES game comes off as something of a throwback. But let's be fair, just because it's a little tough to revert back to the 16-bit F-Zero vibe after the fully polygonal style of F-Zero X, by no means is this some throwaway release. Just as with Super Mario Advance and Circle of the Moon, Maximum Velocity is very much the sort of thing that you had to experience in the context of 2001 to fully appreciate. No, there are no polygons here, and the GBA could only do a mostly accurate approximation of the Super NES's graphical mode 7 tech on which the original F-Zero operated. But this is a blazing fast racer crammed with challenge, and seeing it in action on a portable system was nothing short of jaw-dropping at launch. The only thing that could have even come close to comparing would have been VIRTUA racing for Genesis played on a Nomad. And aside from that being a bit of a cheat on a technicality, given that it wasn't actually designed with portable play in mind, Virtual Racer still wasn't as fast or as challenging as Maximum Velocity. F-Zero Maximum Velocity also has a material advantage over both its Super NES predecessor and Virtua Racing, multiplayer competition. Of course, F-Zero X featured split-screen multiplayer, as that was N64's primary gimmick. Maximum Velocity offers a compromise-free approach to multiplayer. No tiny abstract windows in the corner of the screen, or crowding shoulder to shoulder with other people. Instead, the Game Boy Advance's link capabilities come into play here, allowing 2, 3, or 4 racers to go head-to-head on their own individual screens. And it's good to get in the practice because, played solo, F-Zero Maximum Velocity is a game with no mercy. It contains 20 racetracks and multiple levels of difficulty for each, but even the lowest difficulty setting demands flawless mastery of every turn and every hairpin on even the most basic starter tracks. With its high-speed gameplay, aggressive AI competitors, and complex track design, Maximum Velocity might do slightly too good a job of bringing the F-Zero experience to the handheld. One can only imagine how many GBA systems it caused to be flung across the room in anger back in the day, especially given the screen visibility issues of the original model. By and large, Maximum Velocity plays almost exactly the same as its 16-bit precursor. You and a whole bunch of other racers streak across tracks in a succession of 4 cups, each with 5 courses apiece. Your futuristic hovercrafts can hurtle forward at impressive speeds, but jockeying for position comes with its share of risks. Each vehicle is protected by an energy shield that decreases each time you collide with a wall or another racer, and once your energy runs to 0, your car explodes and you are disqualified, not to mention dead. The speed and physics of F-Zero make for swift and decisive losses. It's all too common to find yourself slammed into a wall by a competing racer, only for your momentum to cause you to ping-pong between barriers as you attempt to wrestle your vehicle back under control. You can easily find yourself going from fully charged to empty and exploded in a matter of seconds if you're not careful. Many tracks also have gaps that must be jumped, and hitting those at the wrong angle, or taking a hit from another racer that steers you off course as you're about to make your leap, can be just as fatal as running out of shield juice. It's not all horrible, of course. The straightaway after the flag in most tracks contains a shield recharge strip that will replenish some of your barrier. You also earn a turbo boost charge for each lap you complete, which can help you pull ahead on a straightaway, or even to use certain jump ramps to create shortcuts. Really though, the secret to mastering F-Zero Maximum Velocity is to play it exhaustively until you've memorized every twist, every turn, every jump. Here I think we see the difference between the Super NES launch and the GBA launch. I've mentioned before that the N64 and GBA launch were echoes of the Super NES launch, with both of the subsequent systems shipping alongside a Mario game and one sequel to a Super NES launch release. With N64, that second game was PILOTWINGS. With GBA, of course, it's F-Zero. But the difference was that the Super NES shipped with only 5 games in total, and the N64 only had those 2. Game Boy Advance, on the other hand, had something like 20, several of which were other racing games. The paucity of launch titles for older systems meant it was far easier to invest hundreds of hours into perfecting your skills at a slight but brutal game. But F-Zero doesn't fare quite as well in a 21st century setting, where it was one of dozens of choices available for players at half the cost of an N64 card. Maybe that's why F-Zero fizzled out 15 years ago, ending with a third GBA release in as many years. A release that didn't even make it to the US, despite the series' comic book aesthetics making it one of the most overtly American-oriented franchises in Nintendo's lineup. This is a well-made game, but it's a taxing one made even more demanding by the hardware itself, and GBA did not lack for other game options on day one. Now that the novelty of a fast racing game on a portable system has faded, the most notable thing about Maximum Velocity is probably its setting. It's the one entry in the franchise that doesn't feature the standard cast of Captain Falcon and Samurai Goro, being set 25 years after the original F-Zero. Instead, it's a sort of next-generation take on the franchise with all new racers and vehicles. Some of their characters and their hot rods bear a strong resemblance to their predecessors. Blitz Wagner, for example, is described as the protege of original racer Dr. Stewart, and his vehicle Silver Thunder looks like a souped-up version of Stewart's Golden Fox. Meanwhile, Kentakechi claims to be the son of Captain Falcon and pilots a racer called Falcon Mark II, although the official game lore leaves this claim curiously unresolved. None of this actually matters, of course, since the plot in an F-Zero game amounts to frivolous window dressing. I know there are people in the world who actually care about the franchise's characters, but they're wrong. Anyway, like Circle of the Moon, Maximum Velocity was a revelation in 2001, but it's a little harder to muster up enthusiasm for it these days. But let there be no question about it. The appeal of playing an iconic Super NES game on the go was hard to top in 2001. The third of Nintendo's 4 first-party releases at the GBA's Japanese launch never made it to the US, though it did receive a release in France. Not Europe as a whole, France specifically. But that only makes sense. This is, after all, a game about the legendary French conqueror, Napoleon. In fact, it's simply called Napoleon in Japan, though in France it was L'Aigle de Guerre, that is, the Eagle of War. As you might expect, it's a war simulation game, a sort of real-time strategy title. Surprisingly, this Nintendo-published war sim does not come to us courtesy of Intelligent Systems. We'll see a whole lot of them on GBA, beginning with Advance Wars, but RTS has never really been their thing. Then again, Napoleon was the brainchild of developer Genki, who didn't exactly have deep roots in the RTS genre themselves. Primarily known for racing titles like Tokyo Extreme Racer, one-on-one titles like Fighter's Destiny and Kengo, and shooters like Kiliak, the DNA Imperative, the closest thing Genki had ever created to a strategy game was the Ghibli-esque Pokemon-inspired PlayStation RPG Jade Cocoon. Maybe this is why Napoleon offers such an unusual take on the genre. While it involves many of the standard gameplay elements you'd expect in an RTS, they unfold in a different way. Napoleon isn't just the leader of your army, he's also your cursor. You interact with the battlefield by guiding your future emperor around to direct adjacent units to perform actions. Napoleon has his own health bar, but he isn't great at direct combat. Instead, you need to use him to issue commands to the soldiers deployed on the field. He can also replenish a unit's health and perform other support actions. But because your battlefield interface is restricted by Napoleon's limitations as a unit, you can't approach the game as you would a standard RTS like Command & Conquer, where your cursor zips around the field and issues multiple overlapping orders. You can only issue commands as fast as Napoleon can gallop, forcing you to be mindful of the flow of combat. Your goal in most maps is to destroy or conquer an enemy stronghold, defeating or avoiding enemy units you encounter along the way. In fact, Napoleon works less like a traditional RTS than it does a genre that hadn't even been invented back in 2001, the MOBA, as typified by League of Legends and DOTA. A hero unit moves through the battlefield issuing commands to subordinates attempting to capture an enemy stronghold. Yes, that's absolutely the MOBA concept in a nutshell. Napoleon did not pioneer this concept. Similar play mechanics stretch back a decade to Technosoft's Herzog Zwei for Genesis. Or if you're really feeling your retro roots, you could argue that ASCII's Bokoska Wars from 1983 kicked things off. Now you may be thinking, but Retronauts co-host Jeremy Parish, doesn't MOBA mean multiplayer online battle arena? How can this be an example of a format when it's a Game Boy Advance game? Well, theoretical straw man, I'm glad you asked. As it so happens, not only did Napoleon allow head-to-head play with a link cable, it also supported, yes, multiplayer online battles with the use of a Japan-only peripheral called the Mobile Adapter GB. The Mobile Adapter GB was run and maintained by a company called Mobile 21, which was another of the collaborative ventures Nintendo seemed to like so much around this era. In this case, Mobile 21 was a joint venture between Nintendo and Konami. Their Mobile Adapter GB allowed Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance owners to compete wirelessly. but since it was poorly supported and cost quite a bit, it didn't fare too well, and ultimately the service was shut down in 2002. Does this mean Napoleon invented the MOBA genre? Well, no, don't be silly. Hardly anyone played this game, at least not online. Defense of the Ancients was still several years from existing, let alone exploding MOBAs into the mainstream, back when Napoleon launched. This is one of those odd little blips in video game history, nothing more. The GBA's fleeting flirtation with a concept that would become the foundation of competitive esports was only really notable as being one of those things that allow know-it-alls to push up their glasses and say, actually, when someone cites some other game as the first ever MOBA. Another odd little blip here, Napoleon reinforces Nintendo's seeming fondness for that particular historic figure. The company had been producing Daitorio playing cards emblazoned with Napoleon's image for a century by the time this game launched. Was this meant as a tribute to the company's heritage, or was it just one of those things? I present this as an exercise for you, the viewer, to determine for yourself, mainly because I wasn't able to find a whole lot of info about Napoleon for Game Boy Advance out there on the internet. Next time on Game Boy Works Advance, we look at some more of those day one racing games.